In the rolling hills of Pennsylvania, where peaceful farmland stretches as far as the eye can see, lies the quiet community of Maplewood Valley. With barely 4,200 residents, it's the type of place where neighbors wave to each other, where children ride their bikes freely, and where the most anticipated event is the Autumn Harvest Festival. But on a chilly autumn evening in October 2023, this tranquil town would witness a tragedy that would pierce its heart and capture headlines nationwide. At the eye of this devastating storm was Sergeant Michael Torres, a decorated military veteran who had spent 15 years serving his country with honor and distinction. Little did his community know that on this tragic night, he would cross a line that would forever alter multiple lives. Michael Torres didn't come from privilege. Growing up in the industrial outskirts of Pittsburgh, he witnessed firsthand the struggles of working-class families. His mother, a factory seamstress, had been assaulted during a home invasion when Michael was just 14 years old. That horrifying experience planted a seed in young Michael, a burning desire to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. After graduating high school with strong grades, Michael enlisted in the Army, fueled by an unwavering commitment to service and duty. His drill sergeants immediately recognized his natural leadership abilities and razor-sharp focus. He completed basic training at the top of his unit and rapidly advanced through the military ranks. Have you ever wondered what drives someone to dedicate their entire life to service? Yet Michael's ambitions extended beyond military bases and foreign deployments. He envisioned a future where he could serve his community directly, where he could recognize every person he protected. When a veterans liaison position opened in Maplewood Valley, Michael seized the opportunity without hesitation. The small community initially viewed the battle-hardened soldier with cautious curiosity. But Michael's authentic compassion for veterans, his relentless dedication to community programs, and his remarkable ability to bridge gaps between people quickly earned their trust and admiration. Within 4 years, he had become a cherished pillar of Maplewood Valley. When the position of Veterans Affairs Coordinator became available, there was unanimous agreement about who deserved it. At 38, Michael Torres became the youngest person to hold this position in the county's history. The town celebrated his appointment as a testament to his character and their bright collective future. Michael's personal life seemed equally blessed. He met Rebecca Walsh, a local elementary school art teacher, at a community charity auction. Rebecca embodied everything Michael had dreamed of in a partner: compassionate, creative, and deeply invested in making their community better. Can you imagine what it feels like when everything in life seems to finally fall into place? Their romance blossomed quickly, culminating in a beautiful ceremony at the historic Maplewood Valley Chapel. The entire town attended to celebrate the union of two of its most beloved citizens. 18 months later, they welcomed their son, Ethan, into the world. As Ethan grew, he became his father's pride and joy. Michael, despite his demanding responsibilities, always prioritized his son. He coached Ethan's soccer team, helped him build model rockets for science class, and never missed a school performance or award ceremony. Rebecca, too, was a devoted mother, often seen taking Ethan to art workshops or reading stories in the town library. To everyone observing from outside, the Torres family represented perfection itself. Michael was the principled veteran who championed his community's heroes. Rebecca was the beloved teacher who inspired young minds through creativity, and Ethan was their bright, energetic son who seemed to embody the finest qualities of both parents. But isn't it true that the picture-perfect families we see often hide the darkest secrets? As Ethan approached his 10th birthday, subtle but disturbing changes began rippling through the Torres household. To casual acquaintances, everything appeared normal, but those with closer connections to the family detected small, troubling shifts in their dynamics. Michael, always known for his steady demeanor and easy smile, became increasingly withdrawn. He began spending excessive hours at the Veterans Center, frequently missing family meals. When present at home, he seemed mentally absent, his thoughts somewhere far away. Friends and colleagues chalked it up to the demanding nature of his work, but an underlying tension existed that defied simple explanation. Rebecca, conversely, became excessively attentive toward Ethan. She insisted on driving him to and from school personally, demanded to be the one handling his bedtime routine, and seemed to constantly hover around him. While some interpreted this as a mother compensating while her husband was preoccupied with work, others found her behavior slightly disturbing. Ethan himself underwent noticeable changes. The once vibrant and sociable boy became increasingly quiet and withdrawn. His teachers observed declining grades and reluctance to engage in classroom activities. When questioned about his home life, Ethan would force a smile and insist everything was fine, but his eyes revealed a different, more troubling story. Have you ever noticed when a child's eyes tell a story, their words refuse to speak? James Morrison, Michael's best friend from his military days and fellow veteran coordinator, was among the first to sense something deeply wrong. He noticed how Michael would physically tense whenever Rebecca's name came up in conversation, how he would redirect discussions whenever anyone inquired about his family life. But every attempt James made to address the issue was met with Michael's defensive walls rising, insisting that everything was perfectly fine. As the months progressed, the fractures in the Torres family's pristine image widened dramatically. Neighbors reported hearing heated arguments emanating from their house late into the night. Michael was spotted sleeping in his truck on multiple occasions. Rebecca, once a constant presence at community gatherings, began withdrawing from public life. The people of Maplewood Valley, always eager to gossip, but hesitant to intervene directly, began whispering amongst themselves. What could be happening to their beloved veteran and his family? Was this simply the ordinary stress of juggling demanding careers with family responsibilities? Or was something far more sinister festering beneath their carefully maintained surface? What would you do if you suspected something terrible was happening to someone you cared about? Unfortunately, nobody realized that the true nature of the Torres family's troubles was far more nightmarish than anyone could have possibly imagined. October 22nd, 2023 began like countless other fall days in Maplewood Valley. The sun rose late, promising another crisp Pennsylvania autumn day. Michael Torres left for work before sunrise, as had become his habit. Rebecca Walsh prepared for another day of teaching art to elementary students. And young Ethan, enjoying a teacher planning a day off from school, looked forward to a day of video games and relaxing at home. But fate had orchestrated a devastating collision course for the Torres family that day. Around 1:30 p.m., Michael received an urgent call from Ethan's soccer coach. Ethan was scheduled for an important practice session but hadn't appeared. Concerned, Michael decided to check on his son at home. As he pulled into their driveway, Michael noticed Rebecca's car was still there. Strange, he thought. She should have been at the school for afternoon classes. Have you ever felt that sinking feeling in your stomach when something just doesn't add up? An overwhelming sense of dread settled over him as he approached their front door. The house was eerily silent, too silent. Michael called out for Ethan and Rebecca, but received no response. He moved upstairs, every instinct from his military training heightening his awareness. As he neared Ethan's bedroom, he heard muffled, disturbing sounds. His heart hammering against his ribs, Michael pushed the door open. What he witnessed in the next moment would be permanently burned into his memory, destroying everything he thought he knew about his life. There, on Ethan's blue and red superhero-themed bed, was Rebecca. Her hands were positioned where no mother's hands should ever be on her own child's body. Ethan's eyes were wide with fear, confusion, and silent desperation, wordlessly begging for rescue. For an eternal moment, time completely froze. Michael felt as though he were observing this nightmare unfold from outside his own body. Then, reality crashed down upon him with crushing, inescapable force. "Get away from him!" Michael's voice, typically so controlled and measured, erupted as a primal, agonized scream. Rebecca jerked back, her face transforming into a mask of guilt and terror. "Michael, I can explain." But what explanation could possibly justify what Michael had just witnessed? But no explanation could ever justify what Michael had just witnessed with his own eyes. In that single, devastating moment, everything, his marriage, his family, his fundamental belief in goodness, exploded into countless irreparable fragments. Ethan, released from Rebecca's grip, sprinted to his father, sobbing uncontrollably. Michael held his son tightly, his mind spinning in absolute chaos. How long had this been happening? How had he failed to see it? How could the woman he loved, the mother of his child, be capable of such an unthinkable betrayal? As the initial shock began subsiding, something else took its place, a rage unlike anything Michael had ever experienced, even in combat zones. This wasn't just a crime. This was the ultimate violation of sacred trust. "Ethan, buddy," Michael said, his voice trembling with barely suppressed emotion, "I need you to go to Mr. Morrison's house next door. Can you do that for me right now?" Ethan nodded, his small body still shaking violently. Michael watched as his son ran from the room, then slowly turned to face his wife, the woman he had once pledged his life to, the woman who had destroyed everything they'd built. "Michael, please," Rebecca pleaded, her hands raised in defense of surrender. "It's not what you think. I love Ethan. I would never deliberately hurt him." "Don't you dare," Michael snarled, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm, a habit from years of military service. "Don't you dare pretend this is love after what you've done." In that moment, what would you do? How would you react? In that pivotal moment, Michael Torres faced the most agonizing decision of his entire life. As a veteran who had sworn to uphold justice and protect the innocent, he knew exactly what he should do: restrain Rebecca, call the police, let the legal system handle this properly. But as a father, as a man who had just witnessed the ultimate betrayal, all he could see was red-hot, consuming rage. What transpired next would forever change multiple lives and send shockwaves through the peaceful town of Maplewood Valley. The following moments passed in a blur of overwhelming rage and adrenaline. Later, Michael would struggle to recall the precise sequence of events, but the consequences of those moments would haunt everyone involved for the rest of their lives. As Rebecca continued pleading and making excuses, something fundamental inside Michael snapped irreparably. In one fluid motion, perfected through years of military training, he drew his authorized firearm. Time seemed to distort and slow as he aimed at the woman he had once promised to love and protect until death. Rebecca's eyes widened in absolute terror as she realized what was about to happen. "Michael, no!" She raised her hands higher, backing away desperately. "Think about what you're doing. Think about Ethan." But Michael wasn't thinking anymore. He was reacting to the betrayal, to the violation of their son, to the complete destruction of everything he held sacred. His finger tightened on the trigger. Have you ever wondered what happens when a person's entire world collapses in a single moment? Bang. The first shot shattered the tense silence like thunder. Rebecca stumbled backward, disbelief etched across her features. Bang. The second shot followed immediately. Bang. The third and final shot echoed through their home, a deafening testament to the death of trust, love, and innocence. 3 shots, not 10, not a full magazine emptied in blind rage. 3 deliberate shots. Michael, even in his fury, retained enough military discipline to stop. As the echo of the final shot faded into terrible silence, reality came crashing back with devastating force. Michael looked down at Rebecca's motionless body, blood spreading across the carpet of their son's room. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air, mixing with the innocent scent of Ethan's sports equipment. For a moment, Michael stood frozen, his arms still extended, the weapon heavy in his trembling hand. Then, as if awakening from a horrific trance, he lowered the firearm. His military training automatically kicked in. He checked for Rebecca's pulse. There was none. The complete gravity of what he had done hit him all at once. Can you imagine the weight of realizing you've just taken a life, even the life of someone who betrayed you so deeply? He, Michael Torres, decorated soldier, community leader, protector, had just committed murder. But even as that realization penetrated his consciousness, he couldn't bring himself to feel regret. In his mind, he had done what was necessary to protect his son, to ensure Rebecca could never harm Ethan again. With shaking hands, Michael reached for his phone and dialed 911. "This is Michael Torres at 847 Cedar Grove Road," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "I need police and ambulance immediately. I've just shot my wife. She's gone." As he waited for emergency services to arrive, Michael sank to the floor, his back against the wall. He stared at Rebecca's body, trying to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the monster she had revealed herself to be. Tears streamed down his face, but whether they were for Rebecca, for Ethan, or for himself, he couldn't determine. In the distance, sirens began wailing, growing steadily louder. Soon, his quiet community would be turned completely upside down. Soon, he would face the consequences of his actions. But for now, in these final moments of solitude, Michael Torres allowed himself to completely break down. He had protected his son, but at what unimaginable cost? The next several hours passed in a chaotic blur of flashing emergency lights, urgent voices, and shocked, disbelieving faces. James Morrison was the first to arrive at the scene, and the look of absolute horror on his face when he saw Michael sitting on the floor beside Rebecca's body was something Michael would never forget. "Michael, what happened?" James's voice was barely a whisper as he took in the devastating scene. Michael looked up at his best friend, his eyes red and swollen. She was hurting Ethan. I caught her. I just couldn't let her continue." James's face drained of all color as he grasped the full implications of Michael's words. How would you react if your closest friend confessed something this devastating to you? As more officers and paramedics arrived, James took control of the scene. He gently helped Michael to his feet, and in a surreal moment, read his best friend his Miranda rights. It was a nightmare scenario, a decorated veteran being arrested in his own home. As word spread through Maplewood Valley, a crowd quickly gathered outside the Torres residence. Neighbors stood in stunned, uncomfortable silence, watching as crime scene investigators entered the house and yellow police tape cordoned off the once welcoming property. Ethan, who had been safely with the neighbors, was immediately taken into protective custody by Child Protective Services. The sight of the young boy being led away, confused and terrified, was absolutely heartbreaking for everyone who witnessed it. The news spread like wildfire through the small community. By nightfall, every single resident of Maplewood Valley knew that their beloved veteran had shot and killed his wife. But as the details of why he had done it began emerging, the town's reaction became deeply divided. Some were horrified by Michael's actions, arguing that as someone trained in discipline and law, he should have handled the situation differently, no matter how extreme the circumstances. Others, particularly parents, found themselves understanding, perhaps even sympathizing, with the primal urge to protect one's child at absolutely any cost. The case quickly gained national media attention. News crews from major networks descended upon Maplewood Valley, transforming the peaceful town into an overwhelming media circus. Reporters established camps outside the police station and courthouse, desperate for any fragment of information about the case. What would you think if this happened in your community? Would you judge, or would you understand? Meanwhile, Michael Torres sat in a holding cell, the enormity of his situation finally settling upon him. The irony of his circumstances wasn't lost on him. A man who had dedicated his life to protecting others, now facing potential life imprisonment. But he felt strangely at peace. Despite the gravity of his situation, he couldn't bring himself to regret his actions. In his mind, he had done what any father would do to protect his child from continued abuse. As days stretched into weeks, more disturbing details about the case came to light. A thorough investigation of the Torres home revealed hidden recordings on Rebecca's phone, confirming that her abuse of Ethan had been ongoing for at least 8 months. This discovery shifted public opinion dramatically in Michael's favor, with many now viewing him as a protective father rather than a cold-blooded murderer. Ethan, still in protective custody, underwent extensive trauma counseling. The details of what he had endured at his mother's hands were absolutely heartbreaking. Social workers reported that the young boy was severely traumatized but expressed relief that the abuse had finally ended. He asked for his father constantly, not fully comprehending why they couldn't be together. The district attorney's office found itself in an extraordinarily difficult position. On one hand, Michael had clearly committed homicide. On the other hand, the circumstances were so extraordinary that many felt a harsh punishment would constitute a grave injustice. After extensive deliberation, they decided to charge Michael with voluntary manslaughter, a charge that carried a potential sentence of 8 to 20 years in prison. Do you think this charge was fair? Too harsh? Too lenient? As the case moved inexorably toward trial, Maplewood Valley remained bitterly divided. Signs supporting Michael began appearing in yards and shop windows throughout town. A legal defense fund was established, with donations pouring in from across the entire country. But there were also those who firmly believed that Michael had taken the law into his own hands and needed to face full consequences regardless of his motivation. Through it all, Michael remained remarkably stoic. His only genuine concern was for Ethan. He cooperated fully with every aspect of the investigation, never once denying what he had done. In his first court appearance, he entered a plea of not guilty, setting the stage for what promised to be one of the most high-profile and emotionally charged trials in Pennsylvania's recent history. As autumn transformed into winter, Maplewood Valley attempted to return to some semblance of normalcy, but the shadow of what had happened in the Torres home hung over the community like a permanent dark cloud. Nothing would ever be the same again. The trial of Michael Torres began on a freezing December morning, exactly 9 weeks after the shooting. The small Maplewood Valley courthouse had never experienced anything remotely like this. National news networks established elaborate camps outside, their satellite trucks completely lining the surrounding streets. Spectators began forming lines at dawn, desperately hoping to secure one of the extremely limited courtroom seats. Inside, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Michael sat at the defense table, looking gaunt but composed in a crisp military dress uniform. His attorney, prominent defense lawyer Catherine Brennan, sat beside him, projecting quiet confidence. If you were on this jury, how would you feel walking into that courtroom? As the trial commenced, the prosecution painted Michael as a vigilante who had taken justice into his own hands. They argued that as a trained military veteran with extensive discipline, he should have known better than to resort to deadly force without any immediate threat to his own life. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecutor began forcefully, this case concerns the fundamental abuse of power and training. Michael Torres possessed the knowledge, the training, and the responsibility to handle this situation appropriately. He could have physically restrained Rebecca Walsh. He could have called law enforcement. He could have removed his son from danger and allowed the justice system to function. Instead, he appointed himself judge, jury, and executioner. No matter how despicable Rebecca Walsh's actions were, she deserved her day in court. Instead, she received a death sentence delivered by 3 bullets. The defense, in stark contrast, portrayed Michael as a father pushed beyond the breaking point by absolutely unimaginable circumstances. They didn't deny that he had killed Rebecca, but they argued passionately that his actions were justified, given the extreme situation, and that he had acted under extreme emotional disturbance. Imagine, Catherine Brennan said in her powerful opening statement, imagine walking into your home and discovering your spouse, the person you trusted more than anyone in the entire world, sexually abusing your child, your son, your 10-year-old boy. In that devastating moment, Michael Torres wasn't functioning as a trained soldier. He wasn't thinking as a community leader. He was reacting as a father, with every protective instinct in his body screaming at him to stop the abuse immediately and permanently. His actions, while tragic, were the result of extreme emotional disturbance brought on by witnessing the ultimate betrayal and the ongoing violation of his child. How would you have reacted in Michael's position? Do you think you could have maintained control? Over the next 3 intense weeks, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Fellow veterans testified to Michael's exemplary service record, his unwavering dedication to helping others, and his sterling character. Child psychologists provided expert testimony about the devastating, long-lasting effects of sexual abuse on young children. Forensic experts meticulously reconstructed the scene, confirming that Rebecca had been shot 3 times at close range, noting significantly that Michael had stopped after 3 shots, not emptying his weapon in blind rage. But the most emotionally powerful testimony came from Ethan himself. Now 11 years old, he bravely took the witness stand via closed-circuit television to protect him from the overwhelming courtroom environment. In a quiet, trembling voice, he recounted the abuse he had suffered at his mother's hands, and how his father had ultimately saved him. "I was so scared all the time," Ethan said, his voice barely audible. "But then Dad came home that day, and I knew everything would finally be okay. He always told me he'd protect me no matter what happened, and he did. He kept his promise." Can you imagine the courage it took for that young boy to testify? There wasn't a single dry eye in the entire courtroom as Ethan finished his testimony. Several jury members were seen openly wiping away tears. As the trial progressed week after week, it became increasingly clear that public opinion had shifted overwhelmingly in Michael's favor. Outside the courthouse, supporters held vigils and rallies every single day. The hashtag number Justice for Michael trended nationally on social media platforms. Support poured in from parent groups, veteran organizations, and child protection advocates across the country. Finally, after 3 emotionally exhausting weeks of testimony, closing arguments, and jury deliberation, the moment of truth arrived. The jury returned after only 6 hours of deliberation, remarkably quick for such a complex case. As the foreperson stood to read the verdict, you could have heard a pin drop in that packed courtroom. "On the charge of voluntary manslaughter," the foreperson announced, "we find the defendant not guilty." The courtroom erupted. Supporters cheered and wept with relief. Michael collapsed into his attorney's arms, overwhelmed with emotion. Outside, the crowd that had gathered celebrated the verdict as a victory for parental protection and justified action. Do you think this verdict represents justice, or does it set a dangerous precedent? But the story didn't end there. The judge, acknowledging the extraordinary circumstances of the case, addressed Michael directly before dismissing the court. "Mr. Torres," the judge said solemnly, "this court recognizes the unimaginable horror you experienced and the protective instinct that drove your actions. However, we must also acknowledge that 3 shots were fired. and a life was taken. While you have been acquitted of criminal charges, I strongly encourage you to seek counseling and support as you and your son work to rebuild your lives. This tragedy has left scars that will take years to heal." Michael nodded, understanding the weight of the judge's words. Today, 3 years after that tragic October evening, Michael and Ethan Torres are slowly rebuilding their lives together. They've relocated to a different state, seeking privacy and a fresh start away from the media attention and painful memories. Michael no longer works in veteran services, having found the public scrutiny too overwhelming. Instead, he works quietly as a counselor for families affected by trauma, using his own devastating experience to help others navigate their darkest moments. Sometimes the most profound healing comes from helping others heal, doesn't it? Ethan, now 13, continues intensive therapy. He's making progress, slowly learning to trust again and process the trauma he experienced. His relationship with his father has grown even stronger, built on a foundation of unwavering protection and unconditional love. The town of Maplewood Valley has returned to its quiet existence, though the events of 2023 left permanent marks on the community. The Torres home was sold, and a new family now lives there, unaware of the tragedy that unfolded within those walls. The case sparked nationwide debates about parental rights, justifiable homicide, and the limits of protective instinct. Legal scholars continue to analyze the verdict, with some praising it as compassionate justice, and others warning it sets a concerning precedent. Rebecca Walsh's family has remained silent throughout the aftermath, dealing with their own complex grief, mourning a daughter and sister while grappling with the horrific truth of what she had done. As for Michael, he lives each day carrying the weight of his actions. He doesn't view himself as a hero, despite what many have called him. In quiet moments, he still wonders if there might have been another way, a different choice he could have made. But when he looks at his son, alive, safe, and slowly healing, he knows he would make the same decision again. This story forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. Where is the line between justice and revenge, between protection and vigilantism? The answer, it seems, is far more complicated than any of us would like to believe. This case reminds us that behind every headline, every viral story, there are real people broken, traumatized, trying desperately to survive unimaginable circumstances. There are no true winners in tragedies like this, only survivors, carrying scars that will never fully fade. What do you think about this case? Was Michael Torres a protective father who did what any parent would do? Or did he cross a line that should never be crossed, regardless of the circumstances? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story affected you, please remember that help is available. If you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, please reach out to local authorities or contact the National Child Abuse Hotline. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more true crime stories that make us question everything we think we know about justice, morality, and the lengths we'll go to protect those we love.